Okay, we're live. Hi, Kristin.
Hi, Maureen.
How are you doing?
I am doing, grand in the whole scheme of things.
In the whole scheme of things, that's pretty good. So, Kristin, you and I met through a mutual contact who put us in touch because they thought that our work was a little bit symbiotic,
Hmm.
which I would have to agree.
I would agree too.
It is. So I think you're probably better at telling everyone who you are, what you do, and why you do it than I am. So please.
Sure. So my name is Kristin Moore, and I have a big passion in helping and empowering people to change behaviors and get new tools to start uh, dealing with life in a way that's healthier. And specifically, I work with families when there is crisis happening. So they have a loved one that they're very concerned about substance use issues or mental health issues. And I help guide the family through a very loving conversation with that individual to help them see that they're not alone and that there is help available. So we do that through invitational interventions. And then the other part of what I do is I help coach people that have decided that the tool that they've been using really isn't working for them that well anymore. And the beauty about recovery is that there is a whole spectrum of when you can step into that. I think in the past, recovery has typically been shown in popular media and other things of having to hit a rock bottom to really have the willingness to get the help. And in fact, there is a whole continuum on that addiction curve where people can choose to step off. And so the coaching can happen at any point in that curve. If you're starting to listen to your gut and it's like, something's wrong and I am not able to stop when I want to stop, or I'm feeling shame about whatever use of substance that I'm using, or I'm starting to see consequences, or my family's starting to talk about the relationships being strained, those sorts of things. And so recovery coach can help support an individual either when they're at that top of the curve and they want to get out, or if they have decided that treatment is one of the best ways for them to start on their path and build a foundation of recovery. Once that individual leaves treatment, I become a really powerful ally in helping them once they get back to their world and out of the bubble of treatment, and help them build their own foundation around recovery moving forward. So that's what I do. I'm a recovery coach and I'm an interventionist.
That's cool. And I love the formal education and training that you've gone through as well. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So on the coaching side, when I originally started up Shift Recovery Solutions, I was really just focused on interventions. And it's interesting, in Canada, there isn't the same formal recognition of intervention as there is in the States. I'd say the States is about 15 years ahead of us. And so when I started going down the path of interventions, I started taking training with some very well-known interventionists in the States, people like Patty Pike, Earl Hightower, Brad Lamb. And there's also an organization called the Association of Intervention Specialists, AIS, and they actually have a professional designation called a Certified Intervention Professional, and it's run through the Pennsylvania board. It is very rigorous. It adheres to standards and ethics. So that's what I'm in the process actually of achieving, is getting my AIS. I'm an associate member right now, and I'm mentoring with somebody. I've got a great mentor in interventions that I've been working with. So on the intervention side, that's what I'm doing, because it's still very gray here in Canada, and sort of anybody can kind of hang out a shingle and say, hey, I'm an interventionist. On the recovery side, the recovery coaching side, again, there's so many different programs out there. So I really did my due diligence, and I found one that I felt was the most robust. It's about a 6-month program. It's run through the NET Institute in the States. They are global educators, so they have students around the world, and that appealed to me too, because they've really done a lot of outreach, and it was the most comprehensive course I could find. And so I'm a graduate of that program, so I've got a dual designation with them. So I'm a certified professional coach, as well as a certified professional recovery coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then they recently started up a pilot program because I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in our world today is people still don't talk about substance misuse. They don't talk about the impact that it has, especially in the workplace. And so they started up a program called Addiction Awareness in the workplace. And it's really about going in and having a proactive discussion, because again, the workplace never gets involved until there's a consequence.
Yep.
So what if we could have a recovery informed workplace where we can have safe conversations around what that addiction curve does look like, and where that movement you start getting from, having a very healthy relationship to all of a sudden you're using it to cope, the chemical coping, to, going down the various stages. And so I'm the first Canadian facilitator for a program called Addiction Awareness in the workplace. And so I'm actively reaching out to companies to see about getting in and having discussions. And I think it's really timely because, as we know with COVID, the workplace has changed dramatically, and people's coping mechanisms during this time have started getting worrisome.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people that are struggling. So yeah, that's what I wanted to do with the designations, and make sure that I did have, the highest level certified by the International Coaching Federation. And I've been really pleased with the organization and the ongoing work I get to do with them through roundtables and that sort of thing. So they definitely have a strong community as well.
That's really cool. Like you say, there hasn't been a regulatory body for a lot of this stuff. And so, like you say, everybody, and I didn't know about this interventionist regulatory body, I'm going to call it college just because that's my background, college of nurses that sort of regulated nursing. But so it's fascinating. And I like what you say too about, we have this belief that people need to hit the rock bottom. They need to lose a certain amount before they'll be motivated enough to change. And that isn't always the case. And I think that what you're talking about is a huge cultural shift in awareness. I mean, you're talking about going into the workplace and talking about substances, where I'm using this to feel, I come home from work and I drink 3 glasses of wine, and that's very normal. Right?
Yeah, the normalization of drinking in our society
it's huge. And you see stuff, I see stuff on Facebook and Instagram. We're not having a good time unless we're holding up a glass of wine.
Yeah, mummy juice. Yeah,
wine o'clock. Yes.
The thing that really strikes me today is, we think about smoking, right? And how acceptable smoking was. And you look at smoking today and how unacceptable it is. We know it's a huge health issue, and we know the damage that it does. It's interesting because alcohol is worse than smoking. Yet the ads that come out today mirror the ads geared and focused on women for smoking, like in the 60s. You've come a long way, baby. And like this liberation sort of attitude. And it's like today, when you look at alcohol ads, it's like, well, you deserve it. You deserve, that they literally brand wine called mummy juice.
Yeah, wild.
Like this is your only coping tool to deal with the stress in your life.
There's so much association, like you say, with I deserve it, I've earned it, I've had a bad day, therefore, da 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 da. I do this with food, right? This is my thinking with food. So when Friday night hits and I don't get to treat myself, I feel very deprived. It's such an association.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and it's that moving from that chemical pleasure to the chemical coping, right? This is, like you said, I use it as a reward, but then it starts moving it. I'm feeling very stressed, so I need it to re-regulate. And it becomes that coping mechanism. And then before you know it, like you're using more often. Yeah. You're needing more and more.
Yeah. Doesn't even feel good, but you're still going.
Yeah. And it's not only affecting you and that feeling on the inside, like that dark hole that you start to get to feel, or that impending sense of doom. But it's also other people are starting to make comments about it, and you start making more excuses and you start blaming other people. Well, if you weren't like this, then I wouldn't have to do X, right? And, more efforts to hide, more guilt, like the shame starts coming in. And so what was really pleasurable, all of a sudden you start going down that curve. And if we could just stop it right there, that would be a gift, instead of having to kind of get into the warning zone, which is, your promises are starting to fail, your resources are failing, you're starting to have work troubles, you're starting to have money troubles, resentments are huge. You're getting mad, you're getting scared, you're not caring for your health, you're not eating properly.
Yeah.
Like, these are all signs that you slip into morning use, or daily drinking, or you're drinking alone, or you're drinking for days. Like, that's still like the warning area, right? And the remorse intensifies, like, oh, why did I do that again? And you start really beating up on yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Or you're going to events and hanging out with people that you don't even like or want to be at because it normalizes the drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've seen that too.
Yeah. Or you just stop going to events.
Yeah,
you don't know how you're going to react, right?
Well, if I'm going to call myself a social drinker, well, then I have to be social. So off I go, whether I like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'll come home and finish another bottle.
And
it's just crazy, eh?
It is. And there was just, like, last week, I don't know if you saw this, there was a really interesting article in the Globe and Mail that looks at they're rethinking what the healthy amount of alcohol actually is. And it's coming down.
Isn't it 0? Like, I would say 0.
Yeah, I would kind of say 0 too, because you're putting a poison into your body.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know, like, so as I study mental health, and I'm starting to become hyper aware of people who have trouble regulating their emotions,
mm-hmm.
right? And you talked about people, experiencing life and coping with life. And I would take that further and say coping with their feelings, right? It's all,
mm-hmm.
It's feeling driven.
Yeah.
It's feelings that's driving the behavior, and always is, even for those who think that they don't. They're very logical. Okay.
Yeah.
But
I don't need to have feelings.
Yeah, I don't need to have feelings.
Autism.
Well, that's a feeling about feelings, right? Like,
right.
I'm going to be so logical that I'm not going to let that mess influence me. Well, that's a feeling too. So, so there's a lot going on with feelings, and what you're talking about is such, if you're talking about awareness level about feelings and even noticing the shame,
mm-hmm.
that, I mean, gosh, it's almost like I just know so many people, including me years ago, that didn't have that awareness.
Yeah. Well, and I was in the same boat too. I was brought up in a family that really used alcohol as a communication tool. It was completely normalized. Like, people were happy when they were drinking. That's how people came together, was through alcohol. And it worked for a long time until
mm-hmm.
it didn't.
Yeah.
And then it started, like, I watched very close family members really go down hard in the curve of addiction, and just watching their lives get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as the isolation increased and increased and increased, and
mm-hmm.
and the resentments and the shame and the denial. And it was really, really tough to watch. But it was almost a gift, because I could see what the progression looked
mm-hmm.
like. And that's the whole thing about any sort of substance use disorder, is it is progressive, right? If you don't change something, it's going to continue to get worse.
Yeah.
But the good news is this is one of the most treatable things out there.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the courage to just reach out and ask for help. And I think that's where the biggest stumbling block is
mm-hmm.
again, the barriers that we have towards this is, first of all, a lot of people aren't ready to look at it, or they don't believe that they have a problem, or the problem's not bad enough, because they may have known somebody else in their life that did go down really far down that. Well, I'm not as bad as that, right?
Yes, exactly.
So therefore, or I only drink on the weekends. Well, binge drinking is an alcoholic behavior as well.
Yeah.
Being really worried about what other people will think about them. Like, there's still so much stigma around substance use disorders, but it is a mental health issue. It is a disease, right? It's not a choice, and it's not a moral failing. And it's interesting, we don't get mad at people for having diabetes,
mm-hmm.
And having to manage that disease. But there's still that stigma and that shame around this other disease that's out there.
So what do you say to people then, Kristin? I'm going to play the devil's advocate a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I had a hard life, and I had to suck it up. I had to pull myself up by the bootstraps. And this person over here who has, a life I would have loved to have lived, got it all easy, and yet they're face down in a puddle. You can't tell me that this isn't just get on with it. Just stop. Just like, what's different between me and that guy over there? I seem to be able to handle my stuff. They're not.
Yeah, well, you're fortunate in that you don't have the disease of alcoholism.
Okay.
And, nobody chooses to be face down in a puddle.
Mm.
Nobody chooses to get blackout drunk.
Mm.
Nobody chooses to have fractured relationships. Nobody chooses to not have control.
Okay.
And I think that's the biggest thing is that myth that, well, why can't you just stop after two? Why can't you, you can't.
Well, when someone's picking up a bottle and pouring it, that sure looks like a choice from the outside. But
Mm-hmm.
what you're describing is that they're driven to it.
Yeah. The brain's hijacked, right? There's a different neural pathway firing that's going on. And those old paths are really worn in there. Like, that's my coping mechanism.
Yes.
And so to be able to change that behavior and having addiction or a substance use disorder, it's kind of threefold. There's a little perfect storm that happens, and part of it is genetic, for sure. Science has shown that. It's also environmental. And so the household that you grew up in, where things were normalized, that becomes your norm, right? And you don't question, oh, what do you mean people don't drink every day, sort of thing. And then the third part is trauma. And there's been Dr. Gabor Mate is brilliant in the work that he's done around that. And trauma can be big T, but it can also be small t. It's like the kid that was bullied. Like, all of those things all together create that perfect storm. And the good news is there are millions of people in really healthy recovery, showing that there can be a different way, but we have to get past that social stigma in that fear of reaching out for help.
Sure. I was so hesitant to use the word addiction when it came to my family, because it seemed so extreme to me. You talk about the stigma of the word. Addiction in my mind was almost like you were writing someone off. You were slapping a label on them that was so harsh, right? Like, I was grouping like my baby boy in with people that I see downtown that scare me. Like, that's a gap that I'm having trouble pulling those two things together.
Yeah.
And so that was part of my own denial. Like, I couldn't go there. Like, no, like, I know he's using a lot and it's taken over his life and he doesn't seem to be able to stop, but I can't seem to call him an addict.
Well, and it has been reworded in the medical colleges and medical world. It's substance use disorder, and the science is there. They can see, and it's interesting, the things that they thought entailed the disease back, when Alcoholics Anonymous was getting in its foothold, and there was a doctor that was very connected with that, Dr. Silkworth, and he could see it was a disease of the body and a disease of the mind, and that there was a craving portion to it, and then that kicks in the allergy, the allergic reaction to it. And they were talking about that in the 30s, and science has finally caught up to the point where, yeah, we can see that it is primary. It's a chronic disease of brain reward, of motivation, of memory, and of all of that related circuitry. And the characteristics of this disease are biological, they're social, they're psychological, and there's a broader spiritual input to this.
Yes.
And the dysfunction that contains. And the characteristics of it is that you pathologically pursue reward and or relief by substance use or another behavior, despite there starting to be not negative consequences.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes.
and that's where the person doesn't have a choice. It's like, oh, I really screwed up last night and I'm never going to do that again. And you could literally have that person on a lie detector the next day. I'm never going to drink or use whatever my substance was again. And then they do it again, and they would have passed that lie detector.
Yeah.
Right. And it is a disease. You're prone to cycles of relapse and remission. If you don't have a really strong foundation for recovery,
right,
and every tool that you can possibly put in your tool belt to make sure that doesn't happen. And if we don't treat it, there's a huge morbidity factor to it. Like, you die from this. But as I mentioned before, it's highly responsive to treatment. Right? So you manage it like you manage diabetes or like you manage any other chronic disease, and you can have a hugely wonderful, even more fulfilling life than before, when your only tool was whatever substance that was to regulate. Your life just gets so much bigger. So
yeah, I think what I was talking about awareness earlier, you just touched on it again with, negative consequences, despite negative consequences. And I think it's the awareness of what's a negative consequence. So how negative does the negative have to be for you to clue in that there's a problem here? So for some people, it might just be, I wake up in the morning and I just hate how I feel. I'm moody. I'm depressed. I'm down on myself. I'm foggy. That's enough for me to say, that's a negative consequence that I don't want to deal with. So I'm going to stop. And for others, it has to be like a sledgehammer over the head before they will recognize that there's a negative consequence here.
Yeah.
In my family, in alcoholism or drinking was almost like an excuse for bad behavior too. Right? So you could, everybody drinks. We drink to oblivion because that's the way it's done. And then you act like an idiot. And then the next day we go, well, he was drinking.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like you're off the hook.
And especially when you're in a family that is impacted, like the whole family's impacted by substance use disorders, everybody's in denial.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Yeah. But if somebody from the outside walked into that room, they sat down, they'd probably be like, this is not normal. Like somebody that didn't have that disease. Right.
Yeah.
So, you surround yourself with people that use the same way that you do, because it also helps keep you in denial.
Yeah.
And denial is a really powerful coping mechanism to keep us safe.
Yeah.
Right? And, those blinders are on until we're at a point, like you said, that consequence can be high. Like there's very high functioning alcoholics that stopped very high before they had any sort of consequences. Or it's getting a DUI, or it's your marriage falling apart, or losing everything. But that's, I think, the big thing is, if we have that awareness and we start really talking about this and making it a safe discussion, so that when you're in that high level entering the curve and you're recognizing I'm needing more and more, or I'm starting to drink by myself at night, or whatever the case is, it's okay at that point to ask for help. Right? I don't have to have those concepts. That can be my line in the sand. Right. And that's really the conversation that we're really trying to get started, is let's not have to wait until there's a massive consequence.
Right.
And the cost associated with that too. If we can catch this earlier and make it acceptable earlier, we're not having the same impacts. Businesses should be really on side with this, because you look at, what it costs a business. There's stats out there that show that 70% of addicted people are employed full or part-time. This is in our workplaces, and we don't address it because I think there's almost this like, well, I don't want it to be my issue kind of attitude. But what it means to businesses is, well, you're losing a ton of productivity off of those people. There is really low morale in the workplace. Like somebody that has to work with somebody that's really struggling, that impacts everybody around them. You look at the absenteeism. and the turnover
Mm-hmm.
and accidents.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big
Huge.
cost. I'm thinking of
It is.
some things, you know.
Yeah, you're thinking of things that you probably can't say.
Yeah. Healthcare insurance costs, you
Yeah.
know, like it costs a company a lot less to, you know, hey, what if we have an in-house recovery coach instead of the cost of sending people to treatment because that they've gotten to that point? Like, what if we could save the
Yeah.
cost there?
Amazing idea.
You
Amazing
know,
idea.
and being more proactive. And there's this whole wellness movement. Sometimes I think we get a little handcuffed by, you know, EAP programs and that sort of thing that are there so we can check a box as a company, but how much are our employees actually using those programs because of potential, well, I don't want anybody to know, am I actually going to reveal, you know, like it just, I think we can be doing better as a society towards this. And it's started, but there still needs to be way more action, like the whole Bell Let's Talk hashtag. Okay, well, let's talk, but what if we actually get some action going here instead of just
wouldn't it be amazing if you did have a recovery coach in the workplace? Wouldn't it be amazing if you had, I mean, anybody to help someone change behavior in the workplace? Right? Like this is behavior change is the crux of it all, because there's a lot of people who even have awareness. I think about my own leadership. I knew where my tendencies were to be strong as a leader and to be abysmal as a leader. And yet in the moment, I had real difficulty not defaulting under stress into the abysmal leadership practices. So it was like, I understand it. I'm aware of it. I know what I want to do. And yet I keep doing this. Like someone to help you change that behavior in the moment would be unreal.
Well, and that's where I think one of the biggest benefits is with, you know, coaching is commonplace, commonplace in businesses. Like I think of my own, you know, executive experience, like anytime there was something big happening, we had access to coaching. And it was an amazing tool because it allowed me to have a different lens, look at things. And really it was the individual pulling out of me what already existed.
Yes.
Right. And that's what coaching is all about.
Yeah.
And that's no different in recovery coaching. You're taking the very best of coaching techniques, which every executive in every company in Calgary has used coaches. Like it's normal. Why can't we do that for mental health as well?
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, being able to have somebody that can assist you in removing personal barriers or perceived barriers to your own health, or somebody that can create that really collaborative relationship with you and tailor to what exactly it is that you need, and be part of that team to give you that support and create that accountability for yourself as an individual. And, you know, I think it's just such a huge benefit and would create healthier workplaces.
Oh, huge. It would have a huge impact. You know, when you're talking about behavior change and you're talking about, you know, some of the addiction as a disease and the biological aspect and the environmental aspect of it. And one of the things that keeps popping into my head as you're talking is that, yes, I'm using this to cope. I'm using this to feel something different than what I'm feeling. Right? Either a reward or an avoidance of a feeling that I'm having. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because I can't process my feelings. I don't know how to do it. I've never been taught. It doesn't seem safe. It's frightening. I'm afraid they're going to overwhelm me and or the people around me. So I'm just going to shut it all down with this substance or behavior, right? And so as I've had a lot of time to reflect back on my, you know, raising my kids and thinking about, boy, you know, is there something I wish I had done differently? I know that I can't control, you know, addiction. I understand that there was a biological aspect to what my kids experienced. And they laugh and they say, Mom, there's nothing you could have done, right? Like it was going to happen. And I say, yeah. I still do wish, though, that I had learned how to process feelings myself and how to teach you how to process your feelings too. So I'm wondering, you know, and so I think about alcoholism, and I think about people, you know, yeah, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use it almost automatically without even thinking. This is just water, by the way. But I think that, but I think part of it is because I don't know how to do this thing over here.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts?
Yeah. So like all I can do is sort of think of my own experience, and you know, so much of what we are taught is generational, right? Our parents do the very best that they can, and they teach the way that they were taught. And so it's really breaking that cycle. And I think of the emotional intelligence, right? Like having that EQ. And it's such a bigger discussion because it's about the socialization of kids, and, you know, especially little boys, and not being allowed to feel it. Little boys don't cry, and, you know, just suppressing feelings. And so there's more of a dialogue coming out around what feelings are. And I think schools are doing amazingly at that, like the teaching that goes on in the classroom for, you know, elementary school kids. And they're starting to learn. I think they're more feeling aware than most of the adults.
Yep,
in their lives.
they are. Yeah.
So that is awesome. That gives me a huge amount of hope. But it took me, you know, I was brought up in that same environment. Like, you didn't talk about how you were feeling. You didn't talk about anything that might be going on because other people might judge the family. Like, everything was very secretive, and there were very big walls built around, and you never really let your true self come out. And it took me doing a lot of work on myself at a later age to really start to discover those layers. And some of the tools that I used that were so powerful was, you know, things like, what are the fears that I carry in my life, right? You know, writing down every fear that I had, no matter how silly it may have seemed. And those fears, some of them were old fears. They were fears that were placed when I was a little girl. And okay, so what was the coping mechanism that I put in? What was my defense mechanism that I created to protect myself from that fear? And just the whole discovery about that. And, you know, I worked with a coach on all of that. And it was eye-opening because you could see the fear and you could see the defense mechanism that was put in place, and like draw a line. And this fear really didn't exist anymore, but I was still using the same defense mechanisms. You know, so that better understanding of okay, what's the feeling that's coming up, and is that feeling, what's it based in? You know, why am I feeling this? And is it an old fear? There's a lovely saying, if it's hysterical, it's historical. So it was tools like that, and learning just like, what did I carry around? And okay, what are tools that I can use if I start having this feeling? Instead of reaching for my substance of choice, what's a different thing that I can do? And so you're hearing so much more now around meditation. Very powerful tool. You know, there's so many different tools out there, and it's just, you know, gratitude lists, like getting out of that negative thinking. And that was another one that I was really, really guilty of, was I never looked at the positive of stuff. I was always focused on the negative, and, you know, these perfectionist tendencies that I have. If it wasn't perfect, I was going to obsess about that. And instead of looking at all of the things that went really well, it's like, I'm going to focus on this one little thing, which doesn't really serve you that well in business, you know, to get hung up on that stuff. And so the self-awareness that comes out of doing work on yourself is huge. And the tools that you get out of that are things that now you've got available to you to be able to use anytime those feelings start coming up and you don't know how to deal with them. And learning to pause, and learning to, you know, it's simple stuff, but it's not taught to us. I totally agree.
You know, you mentioned big T trauma and little T trauma the other, like just in our conversation here. I thought I made that up, but apparently maybe not. So when I was first reading Gabor Mate, and I was reading about trauma and addiction, I was highly offended, you know, because I thought, my kids, I worked really hard to make sure that they were raised, quote unquote, trauma free. And I've had to really adjust my thinking around trauma and what it is and what it isn't. And my own fear around being judged as a mother, you know, who didn't protect her kids from trauma. And I heard someone say, someone who subscribes or to Gabor Mate's compassionate inquiry approach, and he said that trauma is any emotion that hasn't been processed.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, well, now it makes perfect sense that my kids are traumatized because I did not know how to help them process their feelings.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of unprocessed stuff going on. And COVID's been interesting because here we are all isolated. Our routines have been, you know, flipped on their heads. And suddenly people are, you know, often their coping behaviors or substances have been, well, behaviors have been removed. Like I no longer get to go out and do the things I used to do. And, you know, I can't hide maybe even the substances that I've been depending on, right? It's under the microscope. I'm here with my family all the time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the amount, and it bothered me almost listening to people normalize, it's okay to drink, it's okay to eat, it's okay to, like, all that stuff was like, it's like people were giving them each other huge permissions to be unhealthy. And again, I'm like, okay, but let's call it what it is. Mm-hmm. Right? Let's call it what it is so that we're all aware and honest about what's really going on. I am going to binge watch a show now because I don't want to sit with my fear of what's going to happen to my job or you know, whatever it is. And so there's been so much during COVID that has highlighted some of the dysfunctions that we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question to you would be, for people who either started to get maybe notice that they weren't feeling so hot, or they started to notice that maybe someone in their home was, their use of substances or behaviors was disruptive mm-hmm. to the feelings in the house and the relationships, what would be your advice for people?
Well, I think one of the big things is the only thing that you can change is you. Mm-hmm. And for those that are struggling because somebody in the household maybe is struggling more than they were aware of, you can't change anybody else. All you can do is change how you're approaching things or what you're doing. So that would be number one advice, is being able to take a step back, realize that you can't change people, places, or things. Mm-hmm. This has been a very, very challenging time. Mm-hmm. The stress that families are under with both parents trying to work from home and trying to teach. And I mean, this is unprecedented, what we've had to start to adapt to. But for those that are like, the awareness is a key thing. Listen to your gut. And if it's not feeling right to you, listen to that. And then start exploring different ways that maybe you can start addressing that feeling. There's a ton of really, really great resources online. You know, if you're worried about your substance use behavior, you can start looking out at things. There's, you know, things like She Recovers, or, you know, tired of thinking about drinking, or 1 year no beer. Like, there's lots of different resources if you're wanting to look at your own behaviors. As for somebody else in your family, I think the dialogue is really important. Our secrets keep us sick. Mm-hmm. And if we're not communicating in a loving way, you know, one of the things that I do with interventions is, you know, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm concerned about, and this is what I hope. Mm-hmm. Just the facts, like, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm concerned about, and this is what I hope that we'll be able to do. And being able to have an honest conversation and communication, because I think one of the challenges, we're so worried about hurting other people's feelings that we're scared of saying anything.
Yes. And
just coming at it with a very loving approach, it's like, I love you and I'm worried about this. Mm-hmm. You know, but, you know, to worry about somebody is kind of, it's not a behavior that's going to get you anywhere. I love quotes, and there's a really good one. Worrying is just praying for what you don't want.
Yeah.
And that's so true. And I say that because I'm a very good worrier. I've spent a lot of time worrying about people in my family that I have no control over.
Yes.
And, even when I did summon the courage to have the discussion, the denial was such that, no, I don't have a problem. Okay, well, that's all I can do. But what I can do is I can look at what are healthy boundaries that I create,
Yes.
or what are ways. There's lots of great tools for people that have a loved one that's actively in substance abuse. Things like CODA, Codependence Anonymous, or Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous. So there's great peer support groups that you can get involved in. And I think the thing that is so challenging around all of this is you feel like you're the only one that's going through it.
Yep.
And you feel so alone. And that is what the pandemic has really reinforced, is this is a disease of isolation. And it's got everybody right where it wants them.
Yeah.
Right. And so just starting that conversation, and like I said, there's so many different resources that you can reach out to. One of the ones that I've been using with a lot of my families is, I think everybody's heard of Betty Ford Treatment Facility in Hazelton. They're actually they have an amazing family program. It's a 3-day program typically, costs $800 US to go down to, but they're offering it online for free. And that is huge. It runs from 4 till 8. They have one day specifically for kids. Yeah. Specifically for kids to sit. So, I think that's one thing that COVID has been a big positive out of this is the technology acceptance that has come out of it. Yeah. And knowing that, you and I are having a virtual discussion right now, and that there's so many different ways that we can connect. And so even though we may be trying to do the right thing and not go out into large gatherings and all that sort of stuff, there's a lot of support that you can get right through your computer screen. Yeah. And that's where I've really pivoted to with my own clients. Oh, I almost need to play, COVID bingo pivot. I just used it. You can stamp it. I've been really aware of the words that I've been using. Yes. Yeah. But, I am doing all online. And in the past, I think people would have been really hesitant. No, we have to meet in person. Well, no, we don't. We can totally do this online. Some of the executives that I'm working with, we're just having a touch point, half an hour, twice a week sort of thing. So technology's been really, really powerful in that sense. And I think the biggest thing is you are not alone, and there's so much help available, and it's okay to ask for help. Agreed.
I love that Betty Ford is offering that program. And I agree with you about the online is very, very effective. The program that I've run with families, I've done on Zoom for years. And I was worried initially about the connection. Like, am I going to be able to feel connected to someone through a screen? And I find it works beautifully. So yeah, I think that would be awesome. You mentioned compassion a few times. And I think that's one of the things that really stood out the first time I met you, is that your approach to intervention is so empathetic, is so compassionate, is so respectful. Some of the value words that you even have on your website, I've seen, lived in you. And I love, like you talked about doing an invitation to an intervention, which was not our experience 9 years ago. We blindsided our son, and our concern came out in a letter of, we're offering you this or else, the looming or else, we're cutting you off, and so we had a very rigid view of what a boundary was. Really it was more of a rule, right? And so can you speak to a little bit about the invitational approach that you use and your definition of a boundary?
Sure. So the invitational approach is, I think the television series Intervention has done a great disservice to anybody that's trying to reach out for help. Yeah. So but you do need to do that sometimes. Like your son probably, wouldn't have worked as well with hey, why don't we come and have a chat?
Yeah.
There's a time and place for those types of interventions. And often, like if you're dealing with somebody that's younger and that sort of thing, and you're still the parent, but the invitational intervention it's really love first, and it's coming from a place where it's a family meeting. That's really what it is. And I mentioned earlier, it's really a 3-point discussion point, and it's not a place to do therapy. It's not a place to bring up every wrong that the person like it's not a shaming session.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's the facts, and it's just, this is what I've seen, the fact of what I've seen, and this is what is concerning me, and this is what I hope.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you'll accept our invitation to go and get some help.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about the individual. I think this is the biggest thing, is often the person that is using substances is not the sickest person in the family.
Yes,
they actually could be the healthiest because they've actually got a coping mechanism.
They found their solution. Yeah, the rest of us,
right? They've got a solution. Nobody else in the family has a solution.
No, it's so true. Oh my gosh, that's so true. Yeah.
But it's really important that this is a family disease, and addiction is not a spectator sport. The whole family is involved, and everybody's been playing some sort of role. Yeah. And the enabling has been going on. And I hate the word enabling too, because it feels really negative, but you had your experience. This is your child, and you will do anything for them.
Yes.
That is your instinct, right? And so, but that's also something that can keep a consequence from happening and keeping them sick, right?
Yeah.
So the individual gets the help, but then the whole family gets the help. So when I do an invitational intervention, I actually work with the family for a month after the individual has gone off to treatment, because they're going to be going through a massive amount of change and discovery and learning new tools and getting new behaviors. And the worst thing that can happen is they come right back home to that really, really sick family system that's not changed at all. Yep. And that's where it becomes really, really easy to have a relapse.
Yes.
Right. And the resentment that sometimes happens with family. Oh, I think of one client I worked with, and like the resentment, well, finally went off and got treatment. And then there was resentment about them going off, and you've left me now with this is all your fault. And it's just like the poor person
so much
can't win.
No.
So working with the family is really important, and it's important that they start to see their roles and start getting their own tools, right? Yes. And so I'm a big believer in, I think the more tools and the more support that you can get through a peer program, as well as a therapist, because the use is happening over something. Yes. Right? And you need to get to the bottom of what that is. Yeah. And start dealing with that. I like to call them the big barnacles that we keep inside of us forever. And so the family has to start changing their behaviors. They need to get therapy. They need to be, part of a peer support. There's so many good books out there, and they have to change. Everybody has to change. And so the whole family is going into recovery. It isn't just the one individual.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah. Boy, was I ever a mess. Like you say, the addict isn't the sickest person in the home. He was, I'm thinking of my second son, because he was our first sort of and most dramatic experience initially with addiction and recovery. But oh man, and I remember being told, you need to change before he's going to change, and that was like, okay. Yeah. If that's true, then I'm all over it. I better learn a different way of being. And one of the things I had to learn was, my addiction was him, right? So, I was addicted to avoiding how I felt and looking at my stuff by obsessing over what everybody else was up to. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first time, my kids were in a good treatment center, and we were having a family, like a a parents session, and I thought I was talking about being a really good mom because I was describing driving by the treatment center and trying to crane my head over the cement median at 70 kilometers an hour to see if I could see my kids.
I think they call that stalking in the police world.
But I thought this was me being a caring mom, right? I was really worried about my kids. And I wanted to know how they were doing. And I remember the facilitator that night just saying, you need to get a life. And she said it with caring and compassion.
With love.
She did. But it was like, what? That is my life. Oh, you mean I need to have a life of my own?
Yeah.
I didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And so that was one of my first experiences with that.
So it's full of these eye-opening moments, right?
Oh, there's so many. There were so, like, some of them came slowly like a wave, and some of them came like a tsunami, you know, like some of them hit hard. And I remember too, talking with you about boundaries. I had the toughest time. I mean, I went to Al-Anon for years, and I was trying to figure out what this, you know, compassion or detachment with love meant.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get it. Like, I'm like, what does this mean? And what's a boundary? And how do you have it? And what's tough love? And is that what a boundary is? Like, I just couldn't get my head around it. And then you and I sat down, and I did get my head around it eventually, but you put it so succinctly once.
Yeah.
How do you define a boundary?
A boundary is putting the space between you and the person that you love, enough distance that you can love each of yourselves equally. So I can have the same compassion towards myself as I can towards my loved one equally.
Got it.
So it's the distance between that I can put between two people and love myself and the other person equally, so that there's no resentments, there's no expectations, there's like just being able to put that space. And that was a really tough lesson I had to learn personally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, this is a gift of getting the tools. So I had to put up a really big boundary around my mom, who was really sick. And I couldn't be over there in that environment. But that gave me the space to be able to get to a place where, when she was, she got pretty sick and had a stroke. And I could show up with compassion and just be there for today, right? Mm-hmm. And not worry about the hurts of the past, and not worry about what may or may not happen in the future. I could just be there for her today in love. And that was just such a huge gift that I was able to give to myself, and not miss out on those last months of her life, and really be able to repair the tear that had happened because of addiction in our family. Mm-hmm. And that's the gift of having a healthy boundary. She was still really sick, but I could accept where she was, and I wasn't trying to change her. Mm-hmm. And, you know, because I spent a lot of time trying to control a situation that I could not control. And it was my own learning that this is all I've got. I can control me. That's it. And, you know, I've had to take that into business too. Like, I can't control anything that's going on around here. All I can do is control this. Mm-hmm. Or even on the walking path right now with COVID, when people won't keep social distancing, I can't make you stay 6 feet away from me, but I can get off the path.
Yes.
Right. And then I don't have a resentment to you for not staying 6 feet away. Right. Like, right. That's what I can control. Yeah. And so that's developing that healthy boundary. And detaching with love is just, I love you, but I'm not going to co-sign what you're doing to yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and a boundary is one that you can keep. Right. And that's the big thing when I work with families. And we have to write down, like, if somebody's not willing to put themselves first and get themselves, you know, the help that they need, then there has to be, okay, well, this is the boundary. And it may be, you know, you can't be with the kids alone, or you can't do this, you know, and it's a boundary that is keeping safety for somebody else in that situation.
Right.
But it's not done out of maliciousness. It's just like, this is the safety thing that has to happen.
Right. But the perception is often that it's a punishment and it's an
It's not
abandonment.
punitive.
No, but it sure can be perceived that way. And so it can be tough to hold.
Mm-hmm.
Right. When
It
you've
can.
got, especially when you've been well trained as a codependent, that you're abandoning me and you're not there for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that I need to be there for you to be a loving family member. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? Well, I'm actually just doing what I need to do to be healthy.
Yeah. And you're making the choice, not me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's the whole thing.
Right. If
this is your choice.
Yeah.
You have a choice in all of this. And this is what you're choosing.
Yeah, that's tough.
So this is it is really tough. But again, it's if we keep that enabling in place, that person's going to stay in that same spot. They say that if somebody that's in active addiction is happy with you, then you're enabling them.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's good. That's so true. It's so true. Yeah. Well, Kristin, this has been awesome to talk to you. And is there anything that you want to promote right now for your business or the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so if any business out there is interested in starting the dialogue around addiction awareness or substance overuse in the workplace, if you don't like the A word, you can reach out to me and I can do the same sort of thing, a Zoom online, just information session. I'm also available for one-on-one coaching. So if somebody's out there and hears this and it's like, I don't want to keep doing what I'm doing, I'm done. Done. There is support out there. So I'm available for that. And if family members have somebody that they're struggling with and want to get them help, you can reach out to me as well. So
perfect. And a consult with you is free, is that right?
Yeah, I do I do a free 30-minute consultation.
Okay.
And we'll see if it's like I'm the right fit for you too, because again, it's whatever's going to be best for the individual.
Right. So if you're not the right fit, you'll recommend something that
I know lots of wonderful people in this industry. So
perfect. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. And you referenced a slide that I've seen of yours a few times about this addiction curve. Yeah. Is that something that we could maybe include in the show notes?
Yeah, for sure. I'd be happy to give you that slide.
That slide so that we could put it in so people understand, because you've done this a few times with your hand and you've referenced this curve.
I'm a hand talker.
Yeah. So it could be in the show notes so that people could look at it and understand what you're referencing. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Be happy to do that.
Fantastic. And we'll put, of course, your website and how to find you in there as well, because
and I'll send you the link for the Betty Ford free family program right now too. So so your listeners can reach out to that. And again, I highly recommend it. And as you said earlier, you had somebody that you were working with that said you need to get healthy first before you can find help your son.
Yeah.
That's what's great about this family program.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to have anybody in your family in active treatment with them. So
what
literally
a gift.
Anybody in the world can sign up for this. And I highly recommend a whole family sitting in on this. For sure.
What a gift that is. This is the gift of COVID, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to hit stop on the record. Thank you very much.
For the time.
Okay. Hello, friends. Thanks for listening. I am your host, Maureen Towns, and I am the founder of Maureen Towns Consulting. We support families who are experiencing disruptive mental health and addictions issues go from chaos to calm. If you enjoyed this podcast, please listen, share, and subscribe. And please also know that you can reach me at maureenTowns.com, and you can reach out to me through the website, and I'm happy to chat with anybody. My work, the work that I do, is based on my 25 years working as a nurse in both the public and the private healthcare systems in Canada, as well as my facilitation and my education and my training in leadership development, as well as my experience with my own families and supporting them, all the successes and all the struggles with mental health and addictions issues. And you can read all about those issues in my upcoming book, should be released this year. Please, please, should be released this year. And the book is called Broken Open. So keep your eyes peeled for that and any information on that. Again, thanks for listening. Please don't forget to share and subscribe.